Hang tough. Trump promises market turmoil will be worth it in the end for America. Hang on, says China. America is a bully and we'll hit back. With the two superpowers slapping tariffs on each other, causing economic chaos, how does he steer a safe course for us? The American president was keeping a close eye on the news spotted there yesterday, but his friend and advisor, Elon Musk, suggested a completely different approach: zero tariffs. So with us this morning, Darren Jones from the Treasury to answer the question, what on earth's going on? And the leader of the Conservatives, Kemi Badenoch, joins us too, ahead of the council elections in England. And you'll remember Esther Ghey, campaigner for online safety and mother of murdered teenager Brianna. She's back with us talking about a new campaign and on why she reckons the government has got it wrong.
Young people shouldn't be struggling with mental health issues because of what they're accessing online, and we really do need to take a hard stance on this.
And with me at the desk throughout the show today, business boss Siobhan Haviland from the British Chambers of Commerce, broadcaster Jeremy Vine, and the chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, Labour MP Emily Thornberry. Morning. Let's start, as we always do, with what is making the news. Most of the broadsheets splash on what Keir Starmer is going to do about the looming trade war. And the Sunday Times says he will declare that globalisation has failed. Both the Mail and the Mirror splash on the MP Dan Norris, who's been arrested on suspicion of rape. He's been suspended by the Labour Party. And the BBC, among others, has the story of two Labour MPs who've been refused entry to Israel, who we understand now are on their way home. Let's start then. I mean, what a 7 days this has been since President Trump's quite surreal performance with his notice board of tariffs. Siobhan, you represent hundreds of businesses around the country. Is this really a game changer?
So on Thursday, we talked to our chamber CEOs all around the country. We've talked to hundreds of businesses over Friday and Saturday. And yeah, they're really, really concerned. And of course, that's in a week where they're facing national insurance increases too. So they're still assimilating a lot of it. It's 10% blanket tariffs, but if you're a car manufacturer, aluminium, steel, it's 25%. All round, it's a lose-lose situation, global tariffs. It's bad for consumers, it's bad for business, it's bad for the global economy. And
Jeremy, I mean, it is another jaw-dropper coming out of the White House, but, you know, Trump says one thing, yesterday Elon Musk says another. Do you think anybody really knows what's actually going on?
Do you know, at the very start of Trump's second term, he was inaugurated on the 20th of Jan. On the 29th, there was a plane crash in Washington, and he blamed diversity in air traffic control. And at that moment, I thought, this is going to be a wild ride. And obviously, now Musk is disagreeing with him on this, and he's running a show, Laura. That's what he's doing. We're the audience. He's running a show. And I would expect that he would come over and do the state banquet with the king, come out and say, we're cancelling the tariff on Britain now.
Really?
I really think that's what we're building up to here. It's that crazy.
And yet, business, Siobhan, has to take this really seriously, doesn't it? Because if you just hope it's not going to happen, you might really lose out.
I mean, it is happening. It is happening. So, you know, there is some relief out there that it's 10%. It could have been a lot worse. But actually, that's not the case if you're a car manufacturer.
Emily, how do you then see this? You know, are steeped in international affairs. What does this mean? Let's assume for a second it does go ahead, and maybe we'll talk about the on-off a bit later, but assume that this is really the concrete plan.
So if this really is the concrete plan, then we have to, I think everybody is still reeling. And I think that on Monday, we will see the markets falling again. And I think that collectively, the world needs to come together and work out what the best reaction to this is. I think at the moment, understandably, everyone is looking at their own narrow interests, and it's right for Keir to be doing what he's, you know, trying to do now, kind of, you know, work out kind of what should Britain do in response to it as Britain. But we also have a international leadership role too, and I do think there needs to be a collective response. Exactly what that is yet to be determined, but I do think we need to work together, because if the world order collapses, whether or not Britain's got a good deal with America doesn't really matter if we end up in a recession.
But just briefly, you'd like to see the UK then working with partners, because everyone will have seen this week the UK take a very different approach. You know, you've seen Canada, China, other countries slapping back at Trump. The UK's not doing that. But you think if we did it in a coordinated way as a country, that would be a good plan?
So I think that we've played it right until now. We've only got 10%, but the question now is there needs to be a collective response as well. And that's why we need to kind of pause, take a breath, and then work with our partners and work out what the way through is.
OK, well, let's pause and take a breath and also absorb Jeremy Vine's Donald Trump impression. Who knew?
Only brief.
Back with you in a few minutes. That was a burn so early in the show. Right.
Even I can do a better one.
Stop it.
You later on then, you put the gauntlet down. Right then, so to the serious business, because markets plummeting, some deals ditched yesterday. Jaguar Land Rover, for example, said it would pause shipments to the States as everyone's head spins. China slapped extra taxes right back on the US, and companies and consumers might be right to be nervous. So we asked 3 top bosses for their take. First, billionaire and philanthropist John Caldwell.
Trump calls it Liberation Day. I call it Doomsday. Without doubt, America is going to head towards recession. Prices are going to increase as inflation goes through the roof, and America is going to be in a real mess. Other countries in the world are going to be in a mess as well. Fortunately, Britain is going to be in the least mess from a point of view of only having a 10% tariff. But the whole scenario is dreadful. But how will anybody ever trust America again? The alliance is well and truly smashed.
There's a small growing brand that the US is so important to us. It's over 60% of our sales at the moment. This is for sure a really impactful move from the US and a disappointing reaction from the EU. I think we're in a situation where everyone is going to hurt from this, and where there's a disparity, you can address it quite easily without creating this level of pain for, as I say, countries, businesses and consumers.
I think the government's playing exactly the game that they should play right now, which is to wait and see and to not try and take retaliatory action. We support that. Our main impact actually comes from imports. So we're a very large importer of American goods that we resell in Western Europe. Our concern really sits not just around the UK's response, but importantly the EU's response. The concern for all of us right now, we've all seen the capital markets moving very, very actively in the last 2 days, is do we face a recession and the impact that has on our businesses and on the country.
Well, you can hear the nerves there in their voices. Darren Jones, Chief Secretary to the Treasury, is with us this morning. Welcome to the studio. John Caldwell said doomsday, the market plummeted. Jaguar Land Rover pausing, sending exports to the States. Even the new Nintendo Switch is on hold because of all of the nerves and the concerns here. This does feel like a very scary moment for the economy, doesn't it?
Well, look, the world is changing. The Prime Minister's said that very clearly, originally on security and defence, and we responded by increasing defence spending. But now in terms of global trade, that's why it's right that we act in the best interest of the British economy and British businesses and workers by trying to get these trade deals across the line, improve our relationship with the EU as well as the Americans and other places around the world. And I think Keir, the Prime Minister, is showing great leadership on that and doing it in a way that businesses expect us to. But
on that big picture thought, you know, there are very strong concerns right around the world about what's going on. Do you think that this is the week where the global order, and I don't want to sound grand or pompous about it, but do you think that actually the globalisation as we've known it for decades is now over, that era where we can all get, you know, cheap fast fashion or cheap TVs or cheap cars because globalisation works in that way? Do you think that's done, over?
Yeah, it's ended. I mean, the Prime Minister said that himself this morning. Globalisation, as we've known it for the last number of decades, has come to an end. That's why we need Britain to be strong and resilient, also build out our relationships with our allies and partners around the world, but also why we have to invest in the domestic economy, both for UK businesses, but also our public services, so that we have workers and communities who are well skilled, able to take advantages of jobs in the UK, which is why our plan for change is investing in the NHS and skills, and as well as industrial policy.
Although the signs of what you've been doing so far in office don't look great. We know that the forecasts for economic growth have been downgraded. But let's just start then on the trade deal that you're trying to get with the US. Now, we're not going to bang our heads against a brick wall because I know that you're going to be tight-lipped about any of the detail. But in principle, does the government believe that you can at least reduce the tariffs on the UK and potentially get rid of them? Is that the aim?
Well, the first thing to say is that growth was forecast down for 25, 26, but forecast up for each and every year for the rest of the Parliament as a consequence of this government's plan for change. But to your question, do we believe that we can agree a trade arrangement with the United States to improve what is already a very strong and fruitful relationship? Yes, we do. Our negotiators are currently in those conversations with the Americans, but as I say, also with our colleagues in the European Union, in the Gulf states, in India.
But on the American deal, do you believe that you can reduce tariffs as part of that deal? And there have been conversations, but also, as I understand it, basically before tariff day last Wednesday, the phone had stopped ringing and it's kind of come to a halt while everybody works out what on earth's going on.
So we've been clear that we are disappointed by the tariffs. We don't think a trade war where all of these retaliatory tariffs are in place is good for anyone. And we think the way through that is to identify the points of friction and to be able to lift those to improve trade. So that's why our focus is on the trade deal.
But on a really simple, it's a really simple yes-no question. Do you think that you might be able to get rid of or reduce the tariffs? That's the principle of what you're trying to do.
Sure. Because we disagree with the tariffs, of course, we'd like to be back in a world where there are no tariffs. But the negotiations at the moment are on a trade agreement with the Americans as well as with other trading partners around the world.
Rachel Reeves, your boss at the Treasury, admitted this week that we are going to be hit. So should people watching then, whether they run a small business or whether they're watching as a family trying to get on and put food on the table, should we be prepared for an even weaker economy this year as a consequence of this?
Well, look, it's right that impacts on the global economy will affect the UK economy. As the Chancellor said, there's not a huge amount we can do about that. What we can do is go further and faster on our plan for change here at home in the UK.
And we'll come to that in just a second. But on this question, just cut to the chase. Because of all of this disruption and turmoil, should everybody watching this morning just be prepared for things to be even tougher than they already are?
In the global economy, yes, but on the UK economy, we're trying to get ahead of these challenges. That's why the plan for change is important, because it means that we can support businesses through industrial policy, we can support people through investment in the National Health Service, for example, and it's right that we get ahead of that so that the country is in a more stronger and resilient place.
But you've also said that, whatever happens, there's only so much we can do about the effects of the global economy. So we are going to be hit whatever happens.
So obviously President Trump has a mandate to take action in his own country. We are in negotiations and talks with the President in the United States about our relationship to try to improve that. But you're right, I mean, with the government of the United Kingdom, it's our job to try to make the UK as strong as possible. And that's why we've been engaging with business leaders, Prime Minister, Chancellor, Business Secretary and others to find out what more we can do.
So what are you going to change then and what are you going to speed up? We'll hear more from the Prime Minister tomorrow, we understand, but we reported here at the BBC yesterday that some elements of the spending review could be brought forward. Essentially, some projects might be speeded up, money might become available more quickly, and you might also bring forward the industrial strategy, the plan for investment. Is that what's going to happen? Or are you in a kind of a bit of a scrabbling mode at the moment, trying to find out how to bring things forward?
So we're not in a scrabbling mode. I also can't tell you what the Prime Minister is going to say this week because it's for the Prime Minister to say.
Well, he sent you out here to talk to our viewers this morning.
Not to deliver his speech, but the Prime Minister will say more this week. You were right about that. But look, the industrial strategy is an important plank of our economic growth approach. We've been working on it now since we've been in government. We've worked on it in opposition.
So might it be brought forward?
And so we're doing the spending review at the moment running through to June. The industrial strategy has been developed over a longer period of time.
But might it be brought forward?
You'll have to wait for the Prime Minister this week.
OK. Well, that sounds like almost a yes, but you're not allowed to say it to us this morning. Wouldn't, however, the more decisive action be to do what other countries have done? China, Canada, others have said, actually, we're not having this. We're going to impose our own tariffs, our own taxes on goods coming from the US.
We don't think as an immediate action that's the right strategy. We've obviously prepared for all scenarios and we're engaging with British businesses at the moment to understand at a detailed level what the impacts of tariffs are on those businesses and what the options might be. But our strategy, first and foremost, is to continue to have these discussions in a calm way with the United States. As I say, the UK is in a strong position in terms of our trading relationship with the United States anyway.
We're not in that strong a position because we ended up getting tariffs after all, even though the Prime Minister went off to the Oval Office, gave the invitation to the King, talked warmly about this. And at that stage in February, the American president said, I think we can do a deal. All the mood music was you might avoid tariffs. And we haven't avoided tariffs. So that's not such a strong position, is it?
So we're hoping to do a deal. That's what we're working to delivering. And every country had tariffs, and we had the lowest rate of tariff, which I think is a vindication of the work that the Prime Minister and the team had done.
Not a vindication if you're in the car industry and you're going to have 25% to pay on what you're trying to sell in America.
Sure, but the difference in tariffs in the EU compared to the UK, for example, are significant. Thousands of jobs in the UK. So we have a better outcome than other comparable countries, which is as a consequence of our diplomacy. But there is a good relationship between the Prime Minister and the President, and that is a good thing for us and the country. And we continue to talk about the trade deal, which is our primary focus.
One of the things is that the backdrop here is already very tough. And businesses feel that you've not exactly given them a very easy ride since you've been in office. And of course, this is all happening in the context of the massive tax hike, putting up national insurance on employers over £20 billion. And Siobhan from the BCC, I'm sure you know each other, but she's got a question for you this morning.
Morning, Darren. So government wants growth, business wants growth. And as I travel across the UK meeting businesses, the number one thing they do talk to me about probably before Wednesday is national insurance increases and how that is impacting growth. What might you say to them when a business is going to get a break?
Yeah, nice to see you, Siobhan. Look, our agenda with business is broad, whether we're talking about industrial strategy, capital investment in infrastructure, on skills, on the £26 billion we've been able to put in the NHS to get waiting lists down each and every month so that workers are able to get back to work.
But what she's talking about is the £20 billion of tax increases you put that make it more expensive to hire people.
I understand that, and I'll come to that. My point is that the broader agenda for the economy is one that is shared with business. So there's a lot of ambition. We engage every week with business leaders about creating the environment in which investment and prosperity can come forward in our country. To go to the employer national insurance contribution point, we recognise that businesses don't want to pay additional taxes. We designed the scheme to protect smaller businesses. So over 50% of businesses in the country will pay the same or less than they did before. And it was in the context of having to get a grip of the public spending mess we'd inherited from the Conservatives and not to break our promise to working people on their payslips. But this investment is paying off. As I say, NHS waiting lists down each and every month for the last 5 months. I think that's important. And for other parties or people that say you shouldn't have raised taxes to pay for that and get a grip of the public finances, our question has been, well, what could the alternatives have been? We think on the trade-off of all of those things, this was the right balanced judgment to take.
So tough but worth it is the government's position. Finally, in the context of this trade conversation, there have been some mixed messages out of the government about whether or not watering down the online safety bill is or is not something that's on the table as part of these discussions with the Americans. That's now become law after years in the making. Can you clarify what's going on? Because we're going to hear from Esther Ghey a bit later in the programme, an online safety campaigner. And she and many other people, maybe some parents watching, think, hang on a minute, is the government going to water down these protections that are only just now coming into force?
So look, the basic protections in the Online Safety Act are not up for negotiation. I mean, what are they? The protections are that if something is illegal offline, it must be illegal online.
But you're carefully saying there the basic protections. Is the Online Safety Act, as it stands, part of a negotiation with the Americans or not?
Well, as I was saying, the protections in the Online Safety Act are not negotiable because it's the principle that if it's illegal offline, it should be illegal online. Clearly, that is not negotiable. It's illegal. And the second issue, which is really important for the reasons that you'll hear later, I'm assuming, is that where there is harmful content online, especially where it's targeted at children, these social platforms need to be designed in a way to protect children from that harm. We won't be walking away from that.
OK, and just 2 final questions, if I may. Dan Norris, who was a Labour MP until yesterday for North East Somerset and Hanham, he's been arrested on suspicion of rape and child sex offences. He's been suspended, but what did you think when you heard that news? And when did the Labour Party know about this?
Well, look, I was as shocked as everyone else when I was told about these charges. As soon as the Labour Party was informed by the police, the whip was suspended immediately. That's the proper thing to do, as you would expect, as the police have requested. This is a sensitive and complicated case with people who have come forward, and so it's wrong for us to provide a running commentary on it, but it was the right thing that the whip has been suspended, that Mr Norris won't be returning to Parliament in the meantime, and we should allow the police to continue their work.
OK, and also 2 Labour MPs, as we reported at the top of the programme, were denied entry into Israel. Your colleague, the Foreign Secretary David Lammy, has criticised the Israeli government for doing that, saying it was unacceptable for them to stop parliamentarians going in on a fact-finding visit. Are the 2 MPs now on their way home? We understand they are. And what can you tell us about what actually happened?
So they are on their way home now. I've not spoken to them, so you'll have to speak to them about the detail of what happened. But the Foreign Secretary is right and has been clear. You know, British parliamentarians from all parties will often go around the world to see things that we are investing in, whether it's an aid, for example, which I suspect is what this visit was about, or to engage with parliamentarians in other countries. And you expect to be able to go about that business without interruption, which is why the way that my colleagues have been treated is unacceptable, as the Foreign Secretary has said. OK, Darren Jones, Chief Secretary through the Treasury, thanks for coming in. Great to have you in the studio with us, as always. Thank you very much indeed. Well, remember, we want to know what you think. Do you agree with Darren Jones that globalisation is over? You can email us. The addresses are there for you on the screen. Or if you're social media inclined, you can use the hashtag BBC Laura Kay. You can even message us on WhatsApp these days. The number is there, 08000 282 161. And towards the end of the programme, we'll share some of your conversation. And of course, in our newsletter every Thursday. Now then, it's an unusual occasion, perhaps. The Leader of the Opposition agrees with the government on one thing, that slapping tariffs from the UK onto American imports wouldn't help this situation. Kemi Badenoch, I'm pleased to say, is here with us live in the studio this morning in advance of the local council elections, and we'll come to that in a moment. But I just wonder at the beginning, do you agree with Darren Jones? He said globalisation is over.
No, I don't, because globalisation is something that has helped the UK. We have become wealthier because of it. The problem has been that many regions did not necessarily experience that wealth, a lot of it concentrated in London. But look at what he was saying. If globalization is over, why are they closing down North Sea oil exploration? He's talking about using more of our resources. And all of the things that are happening now are going to feel a lot worse because of decisions that the Labour government has made.
But if you say, as the opposition leader here in the UK, that globalization is over, isn't over, but the American president and the Chinese leader are acting in a way that suggests it is, if they're in a looming trade war, actually, isn't that the new reality, whether you like it or not?
But that's not the end of globalization. That's fragmentation. That's something completely different. We still have a great trading relationship with many other countries. We negotiated the biggest trade deal after Brexit, CPTPP. It's got Japan in it, Canada, Mexico, Australia, all countries that are feeling the brunt of President Trump's tariff. What I expect the Prime Minister to be doing is convening a meeting of those countries, seeing how we can reduce tariffs even further between us, because what he needs to do is start making life easier for the people out there. Labour's tax rises, Siobhan made a very good point, the jobs tax is starting today, is making people out there poorer. It's ruining our economy, it's crushing it. Inflation is up, growth has been halved to 1%. The forecasts Darren is talking about are worse than they were before. Certainly worse than when we were in government, and we need to fix this.
Well, you say they're worse than you were in government, but everybody watching, well, some of them will be shouting at the TV and remembering some of the other things that happened to the economy when the Conservatives were in charge. You mentioned CPTPP there, with a complicated acronym, but I think I got it right. When you talk about that agreement, though, and not to decry the point of having that agreement, but the government's own estimates said it would only add 0.08% to the economy over a 10-year period. In terms of the deal with America, what would you like to see? Darren Jones was tight-lipped, but you've said repeatedly that the government could just pick up the deal that you'd been talking about with President Trump when he was last in the White House.
So those deals, those figures that you quoted, I always disputed and disagreed with.
They were the government's own estimates.
But you can do a lot with trade deals. It depends on dynamic effects and so many other things that aren't calculated. But you talk about that UK-US trade deal. We were negotiating that with President Trump. We got very far. And President Biden cancelled it. He said he wasn't doing trade deals with any countries. What we need to do now is pick up where we left off. We had negotiated good gains in that. The worst possible outcome will be if we negotiate a deal where we make concessions to get what we had just last week. So we have to have new things that are beneficial to our economy, not just what we had last week while giving up more.
But I'm a bit confused because you said there was an oven-ready agreement, could be dusted down. You could just pick that up. And then you're now talking about new things. So just on the deal that existed, do you actually think that the Trump administration would say, sure, here's the one we did in 2020. Let's just pick up that and get on with it.
Well, it's the same. It's the same precedent. The U.S. trade representative who leads on trade was in the room when we were negotiating that, and we had gains in there. That's what I'm talking about. That there were new things in there. The worst possible thing will be if we start to give up concessions. You were talking about the Online Safety Act. That's another area that they should not be going to. We should not be changing laws in that way for trade, but we should not be making concessions to get what we had 3 days ago. That would be the worst possible outcome.
But you know, and everyone watching knows, America would not do a trade deal with any country without getting its own concessions. So what would you be prepared to give up? And perhaps these were things that you were prepared to give up in the trade deal that was done with America but never signed in 2020. I mean, are we talking about food standards, access to the NHS? What was the UK going to give to the US?
Well, we don't negotiate on food standards. We didn't sign a new trade deal with Canada because that's one of the things that they were asking for. I don't know if the Labour government is going to do that, but that's definitely not something that we would agree with. But in any trade deal, you look at the total effect and how it is beneficial to an economy. It's not just picking little things and saying, we'll give this up to get that. It's got to be done in the round, in the same way you would have seen we had with the EU free trade agreement. But the bottom line is that whatever we do has to be thought through carefully. Labour did not have a plan. The retaliatory tariffs will make people in our country poorer. There is a place for tariffs. We did use them. But right now, what they will do is make life more expensive for British consumers.
But I think people
and we don't want that.
But if you were still in charge of trade, as you were for a couple of years under the Conservative government, what would you be willing to put on the table to get a deal with the Americans? One that you said was oven ready. So you said not food standards.
We'd gone through 6 rounds of negotiations. We were not negotiating on food standards
at all.
We were, for instance, talking about mutual recognition of professional qualifications. So we allow qualifications from the US. We allow them to practice law here. They do the same over there. It's things like that. It's things where there are gains that are going to improve both economies. But we have red lines in all trade negotiations. Food standards are one of them.
What about access to the NHS? That's something that many people were concerned about the UK government giving to the Americans. Was that something that was on the table in that deal?
I don't recall seeing that. Those were negotiations that took place before I was Trade Secretary. But I did see...
But hang on, because you're saying this deal was oven ready.
No,
Keir Starmer should pick it up. I've got a line.
I said we had been negotiating. We'd had 6 rounds of negotiations and we had gone a considerable amount of the way. I have said pick up where we left off, not pick up the deal that was done.
Forgive me, Kemi Badenoch. You said in November an oven-ready agreement negotiated by the last government could be dusted down. You said that again recently in the comments. So was the deal, I just want to be clear, are you saying there was a deal and that's the deal that should be signed now? Because that's the implication of what you've said before. Or are you saying you'd like the government to get on with it using that as a basis?
I would like the government to pick up where we left off. We had 6 rounds of negotiations where there were some decisions that were concluded, and they can pick that up and take it. But the most important thing is removing tariffs. The tariffs are going to be destructive for our businesses. You talked about Jaguar Land Rover. They've stopped exporting. That is going to make a whole mess of the tax take that Rachel Reeves thought she was going to be getting in her budget. We are in a worse place now than we were because of the decisions that Labour has made. And people out there are suffering.
Clearly, for both of the main parties, it's very important to try to reach out to the American administration. You've been out to Washington since you've been in the post. I think we've got a picture of you meeting J.D. Vance while you were there, the Vice President. Do you feel now, after everything that's happened in the last few weeks, that the United States, the Trump administration, is a reliable partner?
We disagree fundamentally with what they're doing on tariffs, and he knows that. I have said very publicly that free trade is one of the principles that has helped make this country wealthy.
But do you think the US is reliable?
Well, we can see that there are all sorts of different things that are happening. President Trump has said one thing and done another. We need to make sure that what we're doing is in our national interest. The US is one of our strongest allies, irrespective of who is president or vice president at the time. What I'm not going to do is pass commentary and speculate on whether they are or not reliable. What we need to make sure is that we're doing the right thing in our national interest. And right now, that's making sure that we have a strong economy. We need to lift the burden on business, stop taxing them out of existence, and stop silly decisions like not exploring oil in the North Sea, which is absolutely critical for the growth of this country.
You're joining us today with the local council elections in England approaching fast. 19 of those councils at the moment are run by your Conservative colleagues. But you know, and everyone watching knows this morning, that you were hammered last year in the general election and you're not having a good time in the polls at the moment. So how many councils out of those 19 do you think will still be Conservative run after the vote?
So I'm not going to play guess the number. What I have said is that these are going to be very challenging local election results. The last time they were fought was 2021. Boris Johnson was Prime Minister, there was a vaccine bounce. We won 67% of the vote, or 2/3. That is extraordinary and unprecedented. No one has ever done that before. So we are going to lose seats. But what I do tell people is that this election, this local election, is not an opinion poll. It is about who you want to run your local services. And Conservatives deliver across the board lower taxes and better services. And if you don't, you could end up with what's happening in Birmingham, with rubbish piled up in the streets and rats running around because of Labour failure.
Well, it depends which studies you look on and how you do the calculations as to which councils give you a better deal on council tax. And of course, each party says that their councils get the better deal.
Across the board, on average, Conservative councils deliver lower taxes for better services.
Well, it does depend on how you do the numbers. But I just wonder, in this political situation, you know, you've been in charge for a few months. You've made some big admissions about things that went wrong. And yet in the polls, we see Reform UK, Nigel Farage's party, consistently ahead of you. The Lib Dems are feeling confident about making gains in councils where they often work very hard to get a foothold. How seriously are you taking the risk that in a real life test like this, not just polling, that Reform will outperform the Conservatives?
We are working hard for every single vote. But as I said, I think even on this show, this is a very competitive political environment.
So Reform might beat you.
We need to make sure that we have the best offer. But this is not a time to vote for protest parties, because you are deciding, your viewers are deciding, who is going to look after the rubbish collection, who's going to make planning decisions, where homes will be built, looking after schools in many circumstances. Local councils do a lot of things that impact our lives. And yes, we know that many people are still angry with the Conservatives. That's why we're not in government. And they're tempted to vote for protest parties. But you have to look at what you get for services and delivery. And at local government, we beat every other party across the board.
If the losses are, as your phrase was, very, very challenging, which is, you know, political speak for really pretty grim, are you confident that your party will be happy to leave you in charge and give you more time to make the changes you want to make?
Well, let's look at how long oppositions have been in opposition. The last one was 14 years. Before that, 13 years. Before that, 18 years. There's no way we're going to turn around our most historic defeat in 5 months.
Do you think you're going to be in opposition for 14 years?
I don't think so. I think that we can do this in 4 years, but it's going to take time to rebuild trust with the public. And that's why I'm making it clear that the Conservative Party is under new leadership. We've acknowledged mistakes that we've made, especially in areas around immigration. We have new policies there, like changes on indefinite leave to remain, which should show people that we are taking this issue seriously. But we're not going to rush out with lots of announcements. We're taking the time now to build real plans, which is what Labour did not do. They didn't have a plan for government. They just had a plan to win. Winning is not enough. What are you going to do when you get there? And what we have seen is business confidence down, growth is down, inflation up, taxes up. That is terrible for our country.
Anyone would think that there's an election coming. Just briefly, and we're almost out of time, the big story with these two Labour MPs being refused entry to Israel, the government has said it was unacceptable, but do you think that Israel was entitled to do what they did? What's your view?
Countries should be able to control their borders. What I think is shocking is that we have MPs in Labour who other countries will not allow through. I think that's very significant.
Shocking because?
Well, if you look at the reasons why the Israeli government has given for why they're not letting them in, they don't believe that they're going to comply with their laws. MPs do not have diplomatic immunity. I believe that the people who represent us in Parliament should be people who should be able to go anywhere in the world and people not be worried about what they're going to do when they go into those countries.
Are you suggesting the Israelis were right to worry that these two Labour politicians would break the law if they got into the country?
Well, that's the reason they gave. And what I believe is that every country should be able to control its borders. We do the same thing. There are many people that we don't allow into our country, and I don't think we should be setting precedents in a different way.
So just to be clear, you believe the Israeli government's account of this, not the Foreign Secretary who says they were treated unacceptably?
The Foreign Secretary has given his view. I've given my view.
OK, you have given your views. Kemi Badenoch, it's great to have you with us in the studio as ever. Thank you very much. We'll see you soon. Well, the Lib Dems say the UK should work with the EU and Canada and impose its own tariffs if needed. Reform UK says because of Brexit, the UK is in a better position to get out of the tariffs than other countries. And with those local elections in parts of England approaching, as we've been talking about, we'll talk to Nigel Farage, Ed Davey and Carla Denyer from the Greens in the coming weeks before polling day, which I think, if I'm correct diary-wise, is on the 1st of May. Well, let's talk then to my team at the desk. Before we talk about the big economic picture, Emily, I must just ask you there, Kemi Badenoch indicating she believes the Israeli government's account that these 2 Labour MPs were up to no good, essentially. What's your take of that? You look quite horrified, I have to say.
Absam Mohammed, and I know Yang very well. I know Absam particularly because she's a member of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee. And these are 2 young women who are potential leaders. I mean, people listen to what they say. They are highly respected parliamentarians, and Israel is badly advised to try to alienate them, to humiliate them and to treat them in this way. Because people listen to what these 2 young women say, and they will do for decades to come. And in my view, Israel really needs to start making friends as opposed to alienating people in this way. I think that it's an insult to Britain, and I think it's an insult to Parliament. I am outraged, and I cannot believe that the leader of the opposition would simply take on the face of it what it is that the Israelis say, because we know that there are times when the Israelis say what the Israelis say first time isn't what they say when they've had a chance to think about it. All we have to think about at the moment is the way in which those people arriving at the scene in ambulances were shot, and the first description and explanation that the Israelis gave, and now they're going back on it. I think that they will rue the day that they did this to British parliamentarians. This is the first time that they've ever refused MPs access to the country, and they were going with a parliamentary group that was organised with Carbu that has brought parliamentarians into the region for decades, twice a year, and frankly, the insight the parliamentarians have is because they visit the area. If Israel has something to hide, then that would be a terrible thing. But frankly, they should be open to parliamentarians going to see what is actually happening on the ground.
OK, well, without question, this is going to be a big story developing through the day. Let's then talk about the big picture of the economics here. Siobhan, on tariffs, on the UK's approach, what did you make of what Darren Jones said?
So, when we talked to our businesses over the last couple of days, they said a couple of things. So, vast majority, this is going to significantly impact their business. They're really concerned. But what they also said when we asked them, what should we do about it? They said the government should continue to negotiate. It's about negotiation, not retaliation.
So your members are on board with, Keir Starmer's kind of language about cool heads and calm demeanour. But Jeremy, I wonder though, do you think there is some appetite, any appetite perhaps from people watching this morning who want something else, everyone will remember that Hugh Grant moment in Love Actually, and Labour MPs been quoted in the papers. Yeah. I'm not just saying that to be cheesy, saying actually, show us something different, show your mettle, stand up to Trump.
It's interesting, the listeners who ring my show on Radio 2 have been so angry about Starmer since the start, about the winter fuel allowance and the farmers' tax and the NICs, which you've mentioned, Siobhan. And so I think Starmer, with the Trump performance, has almost swerved a bullet here because he's gone into a slightly different dimension. He's now a world leader and he's got to get us out of this. And I think on the programme today, it's been fascinating. We've had this, the choice is placate him or fight him. And I can't work out, listening to the politicians, what they think. I can't work out, you think we should get together with other countries and do something. I guess that's fighting. Would we not be better off on our own, saying we're going to undercut the EU? We've caught a break at last. For the first time since Brexit, we've got 10%, they've got 20%.
Yeah.
Can we not get China to come in here and build all their factories here?
Well, OK, so there are lots of questions there. So, the first thing is that half of our trade is with the European Union. And although Kemi Badenoch may talk about organising a free trade agreement with the European Union, obviously we had a free trade agreement. And what we've done is we've put a lot of barriers to trade with the European Union, not tariffs, but basically red tape. And so what we do need to do, we mustn't, no matter how much noise there is coming from the United States, we do have to continue to also focus on improving our relationship with the European Union, because they will. We can't fight with geography. They are our neighbours, they are our friends, and they are our relatives. You know, so we do need to continue to trade with them in a much better way than the agreement that was signed by Boris Johnson on Christmas Eve.
There's an irony, though, isn't there, that you've got a government chock full of Remainers who are horrified by the whole thing, actually benefiting at the moment in some ways from the UK being able to get a better deal by not being part of a big bloc where 27 countries have to agree a joint position, and they've been hammered by tariffs worse than here. Well,
I mean, that may be an argument that might survive for 2 or 3 days. But if we continue on this path, if there is a collapse of the global economy, then it doesn't really matter. You know, that's why I think that we need to look after our own interests in the short term, but we do need to step back and start working together and work out how we're going to react to this. I cannot believe that one man in the United States can by himself bring down the world economy. I mean, where is the US Constitution or law, or what's happened to Congress, or to Senate, or to Wall Street, or to the media? You know, I do wonder. I mean, I know that at the moment we're all very, very worried and we're still reeling, but I do wonder whether in a month's time we will look back on this and go, oh, it wasn't exactly what he said.
Well, you're with Jeremy. You think it might not happen.
I think this reminds me a bit of the start of COVID, where people think there's something very bad going on over there.
But then it was very bad.
It was very bad, and your initial thought is it's a long way away, but in your heart of hearts you think it's coming here.
Siobhan,
go on.
What about, though, you know, Darren Jones, one of the most senior politicians in the country, sits in the Cabinet, Chief Secretary of the Treasury, sits in the chair this morning and says, globalisation is ended, it's over. Is that true?
We wouldn't agree with that. This is not a zero-sum game, right? We can negotiate with the US. We need to get the best deal for the UK, absolutely. But we really want to see a closer relationship with the EU. Like our businesses still say after 4 years, it's really hard trading. You know, sometimes it's quicker to get your goods to the US than it is over the border in France. And back to the tongue twister of CPTPP, there are huge growing markets across Southeast Asia where we have almost zero tariffs that we need to help our businesses get into.
So there are lots of opportunities
yes,
too. Just briefly, how did you appreciate or not Darren Jones' answer to you about national insurance whacking business over the head?
How did you summarise it? Tough, but...
Well, tough on you, but worth it was his take.
So look, businesses do think that supporting our NHS and our education system is really important for them and their workers. They do. But remember, private businesses, thriving businesses, more jobs, more taxes back to the Chancellor, better public services. So they are ones growing the economy.
And Jeremy, do you think, and I know you watch America closely as well as watching the UK, do you think on President Trump that this might end up backfiring? I mean, his former director of communications, who of course is good at attracting attention, but Anthony Scaramucci, I think, wrote online that Trump could be the American Liz Truss.
I saw that. I mean,
the murmurings from the Republican Party that actually they might be very unhappy about this, but...
I don't think he cares about his party, but he does care about the stock market. And I saw him described yesterday as the single biggest wealth destroyer in the history of the world. And I do think he'll be sensitive to that. And I actually think it's the first time this morning I thought he might panic if he plunges America into a recession.
If he pushes it back and he goes, oh, I've had so many great offers from countries around the world to change the tariffs. We're going to put this off and we're going to negotiate it, and it'll might end up petering out and end up being like the wall. Do you remember the wall he was going to build? I mean, how many bricks did he actually lay on that wall between Britain and Mexico? And yet his supporters think that he's great and he built a wall. Perhaps we'll be in the same situation.
I'm constantly trying to work out how it works from his point of view. If it's going to go well, what does that look like? I'm not sure.
OK, well, we will see in the coming weeks, but fascinating to watch it and fascinating to hear your views. Thank you so much. Now then, who could forget Esther Ghey, the mother of Brianna, who was killed at age 16 by 2 other teenagers? They'd watched violent content online, but Esther turned her awful loss into action, campaigning to protect kids online and sharing her story with us last year. As the debate over the risks and rewards of the internet raged, Esther has now joined forces with 22-year-old Roxy Longworth. She was targeted at 13, persuaded to send nude pictures to an older boy. But in a new campaign, Behind Our Screens, designed so that kids' voices, not just anxious parents, teachers or politicians, can be heard, the two of them have come together. I sat down with them yesterday.
I think we hear so much from like teachers and parents and like older people about what young people are accessing online and the dangers online. But Roxy's campaign aims to collect voices of young people and see what they're really experiencing. And I think that this is so important because I've been, like, every single week when I speak to somebody new, I learn something new about what they are facing online, and it never ceases to shock me.
What moved you then, Roxy, to start this campaign behind our screens?
I think there were a couple of things. Firstly, the amount of time I spent feeling so ashamed of what happened to me and so alone. And then when I started campaigning, I was often the only young person in the room in conversations around online safety, and that was frustrating. And then I started speaking in schools, and I was hearing all these stories from other young people, similar to mine, and I was like, wow, like, how are there all these people feeling ashamed and alone when actually everyone's experienced something or seen something that made them uncomfortable? And even I was shocked by how quickly the young people's experiences are evolving and changing. Even I didn't know what was going on, and I'm only 22. And I just realized how important young people's insights are in these conversations, so that the solutions actually work for us, so that they're actually based and informed by real lived experiences.
Love you to share some of the things you've been hearing about what's happening right now, but could you share a bit of what happened to you?
Yeah, of course. So at 13, I was coerced into sending photos to this 17-year-old guy at my school. It's hard to explain how subtle the pressure was, but it was very strong. And he then shared those with his friend, who used them to blackmail me into sending whatever he wanted, with the threat that if I didn't, he would send them around the school. So my summer holidays between year 9 and 10 were just spent feeling disgusting, trying to keep this all a secret, and dreading his next message. Eventually he delivered on his threat. The photos went all around the school, everyone saw them. The bullying was intense after my friends stopped speaking to me, and I felt like it was all my fault. I felt disgusting. The school found out and punished me, and I started punishing myself by self-harming, and my mental health completely spiraled. Mostly because of the shame, I think. Stopped sleeping, started hearing voices, was hospitalized with a psychotic episode, and spent the next several months on suicide watch. So when I started speaking out about it, I was inundated with messages of people with similar but different experiences, but the common thread throughout it was this feeling of shame. I was like, that is crazy that all these people are sat on their own feeling that.
And that inability to be open about what happens online is, we know, Esther, that's one of the things that happened in Brianna's case. You didn't know what she was seeing online.
No, and after having conversations with Roxy, like, I think that perhaps as a parent I approached it in the wrong way. Sorry, I feel emotional about that, and after listening to your story as well, Roxy, like, thank you for sharing that. But so, like, when Brianna was accessing things such as self-harm sites and eating disorder sites, and she ended up in hospital as a result because she'd lost so much weight, and I only found out about that after she died. But I was concerned about what she was accessing online and who she was speaking to online more so. And I would take Brianna's phone away from her as a punishment. And I think that probably resulted in her coming away from me and not wanting to be open with me about what she was accessing online.
Roxy, tell us then about some of the things that you hear now that have shocked you.
I think having spoken to young people and adults, the gap is very clear, and like that generational gap is only growing, and that scares me. I think a lot of young people I've spoken to have said that they're scared to tell their parents about anything they see online because they're worried their phones will be taken away as punishment. So even if they're concerned about something, they can't ask their parents because they're worried they'll just kind of freak out and take their phone. I'm hoping that by giving young people a space to just share, not necessarily these terrible experiences, but anything they're confused about or something that they've seen that makes them uncomfortable, I'm hoping that will just firstly ease the shame and also bridge that gap between these generations so that parents and teachers and politicians have these insights and can make informed decisions.
Esther, at the moment, it's very fashionable in political circles because of the drama adolescence to talk about this kinds of issue. You, of course, have been campaigning on it for quite a long time now. I mean, what do you think of how far the government's got with this? The Online Safety Act has come into force, but then there's also suggestions that that might even be watered down to try to please the United States. So how would you assess how far the government's got?
I think that the fact that it could be potentially watered down is absolutely shocking. If anything, it needs to be even stronger. Whilst we are like questioning whether it's strong enough or not enough, or whether it should be watered down, young people are at harm and young people are losing their lives, and young people shouldn't be struggling with mental health issues because of what they're accessing online, and we really do need to take a hard stance on this.
What about banning phones in schools? I mean, this is something the government says doesn't need to happen. In fact, the Prime Minister said banning phones in schools will be a waste of time. It's not the problem. But some of the politicians, the Conservatives, think they should be banned in schools. What's your view of that? And you, Roxy?
So I don't know if we have different views on this. So like for me, I think we need to support teachers in doing just a blanket ban across England, because I've heard that if a school has banned phones in one area, but in the same area another school hasn't, then it becomes an issue with parents and students, and it just needs to be something that's across the board to make it easier.
I think these are the decisions that need to be informed by young people's actual experiences. I think if you make big gestures without really finding out exactly like the nuanced situations that are impacting their lives, then there's a worry that that will just help to widen that generational gap rather than bring people together by encouraging more secrecy from young people.
One of the extraordinary things that people will remember you did after what terrible thing happened to you is you offered to meet the mother of the girl who took Brianna's life. Now, I know that meeting did take place and you actually then have become friends and you've shared some of that common ground because, of course, she was also accessing terribly dark material online. What was that like? Can you just tell us about, have you found common ground?
I really appreciate Emma meeting me, and I really would call Emma a friend now as well. And she is just a normal mother, and she had no idea what her child was accessing. And I think that this is kind of the danger with smartphones. They have them in the pockets 24/7. We can't access we can't monitor what they're accessing all of the time.
But it's an extraordinary thing that you've become friends with the mother of a young woman who took your child's life.
I suppose it's helped me in a way, because I think that you can make stories up in your own head about the way that people are, and it was important for me to meet her to understand that actually she's a normal person, and that's helped me kind of not move on from it, because I don't think you can ever move on from something so horrific, but it's helped me to accept that actually she's just, we're both navigating something that's extremely difficult, and she's lost a child too.
So many of our viewers were so moved with how you spoke to us last year with such dignity and courage. And I know people will want me to ask you today, just how are you? And you said already you can't, of course, move on. You can never completely move on from what happened, but how are you?
Oh, thank you. I suppose I have good days and I have bad days, and I think that Brianna really is kind of the driving force behind everything that I do, and we need to be so proud of our we need to be so proud of our young people, because they really are amazing. And I just really hope that we can make a difference, because the amounts of mental health issues that young people are struggling with, and the issues that are online now, it's not right, and we need to do something about it.
Esther, it's a pleasure to see you again, and Roxy, it's lovely to meet you. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.
And Roxy and Esther's campaign is called Behind Our Screens, and you can contact BBC Action Line if you've been affected by those issues. There's lots of help out there, and a lot of it's pulled together on that website address on the screen for you there now. It's so affecting to hear these individual experiences. What I was really interested by hearing Roxy speak was about this generation gap. You know, there's been a big debate raging for ages about what to do. But Jeremy, what did you think of it? She was saying, as a 22-year-old, she's got no idea what's going on in schools online now.
No, I'm just defeated by it. I was remembering an awful killing of a young goth woman called Sophie Lancashire about 20 years ago, and that was almost an analogue version of this crime. And it seems that digital allows people to share the most horrible feelings and intentions. And I think in 30 years' time, we're going to look back on this period and compare it to when the Victorians used to throw excrement out of their top windows. I think it's just awash with filth. And I want to see what happens in Australia, where they're going to properly clamp down. I'm sorry to sound a bit restrictive here, and I love the internet. I've got my phone right here.
I was going to say, you're huge on social media.
Well,
You're
on
always
the
on
way
it.
here, I was thinking, which country has the biggest Trump tariff? And I spoke into ChatGPT, and I asked the question, and within a second, it told me it was Saint-Pierre and Miquelon at 50%, and then I looked up where it was. That's all great. But what goes on under the age of about 16 online, I dread to think. And my daughters are 18 and 21. I reckon we slightly swerved it. I think they were on a more basic level of social media. So I really, and that was a very, very powerful interview by them both. Yeah.
Emily, what is the answer for politicians here? Because, you know, the last government struggled to get on top of this issue, then in the end came up with the Online Safety Act, which at the time was a piece of landmark legislation. Now your government's given sort of mixed messages saying, oh, we must do more, but then they don't want to upset the Americans by clamping down too hard. What's the answer?
Can I just begin by saying I agree with everything that Jeremy just said. I think it was pretty much what I wanted to say too. And it's very hard, you know, for our generation to have such a barrier, you know, and to know that youngsters have a completely different world and we have so little access to it, and how little protection there is and how very frightening that is. And so I think that it's right that we do bring in this Online Safety Act, and it does have, I mean, it is the most revolutionary of all legislation, as far as I understand it, across the world. I mean, obviously the Australians have banned phones for kids under 16, but I mean, further than that, we're kind of on their heels. So let's see what happens. Let's see if that's enough. I suspect it definitely isn't, and we're going to need to review it. We need to introduce it, which is what we've just done. I'm told that there's going to be some enforcement happening in the next few weeks. Let's see how fast it goes. But my experience of dealing with the industry is that it is really hard to talk to them, and they are, you know, very evasive, and it's quite hard to hold them to account.
And watch this space then, perhaps in terms of extra bits that the government might do. But what about as, you know, as human beings, as adults, as families, as frankly adults, lots of parents glued to their own phones, Siobhan?
Yeah, and what you heard there, the message I took away was talk to your young people, keep the lines of communication open. I've got 2 teenagers. You know, we're the last generation who didn't grow up with smartphones in our hands. We are parenting in the dark, you know.
Do you feel that, really?
Yeah, we need help. And
I was going to say, in COVID, one of my young relatives decided to set up a jewellery business, and she did it on TikTok, and it went completely gangbusters to the point where she owed £50,000 in tax. Can you imagine? So,
did it tell her about the tax bill on TikTok,
no,
or was that like
at the age of 14? Believe me, she was shocked and disgusted. But what was interesting was TikTok then worked out that she was only 14 and shut her account. And I was going to complain to TikTok about it, and I thought, no, actually, they're doing a good thing here. They don't want 14-year-olds corresponding with strangers.
But I do think that the industry does know much more in terms of the dark stuff than they are prepared to admit. If they know that I like blueberry muffins, do you know what I mean? I mean, it's like there is a much deeper insight, and there is much more that they could do.
OK, well, all 3 of you, thank you so much for being with us this morning. Maybe time for some blueberry muffins. But thank you very much indeed for being with us today. Thank you, of course, also for getting in touch. Let's hear what you had to say. You were talking about trade. Wendy Sanderson said, I think everyone except the USA should work and trade together. Jan says we can't say globalisation is over just because there's one man in the US who behaves like a spoilt child. He must have been listening to Emily Thornberry. And John Smith says it defies common sense that you can declare your priority is growth and yet a huge tax is put on business. Thank you so much for your thoughts. Thank you to all of our guests and, of course, most of all to you for spending your Sunday morning with us. It's 22 hours until the stock market opens here tomorrow morning. 28.5 hours until the bells will ring on Wall Street. Will they be calling time on the way the world does business? We knew when Donald Trump returned to office that it might be bumpy, but I'm not sure that any government, including the UK's, really bargained on it being like this. We'll catch up on Thursday. Who knows what will have happened by then in our newsletter. You can see how to sign up there on the screen. And of course, in the old-fashioned way, I'll look forward to seeing you next week, same time, same place.